And my husband would he would walk by me with my laptop, like there might have been tears, and and he would say, "Write the next one, write the next one." And of course, this is what also um, writing experts and people in the writing community say. Like the first book you write may not and probably won't be the one that gets you an agent and or a book.
You're listening to Writer Unblocked, a podcast for aspiring and experienced authors. I'm your host and author coach, Nicole, and on this show, we chat with up-and-coming as well as best-selling authors, literary agents, and publishing professionals to inspire you and keep the vibe high. Today on Writer Unblocked, I'm chatting with author Robin Brooks, who is writing about my favorite topic, time travel. You guys, her journey is a testament to perseverance and rediscovering the joy in writing. She's a full-time working mom, and she decided to pursue her dream of writing and publishing a book in her 40s, proving it's never, ever too late to show up for yourself. And we talk about this soul-crushing journey because she went through query rejections and ultimately landed herself an agent, but not with her first book. So she had to face the rejection and face the feedback and say, what do I need to do? Where do I need to pivot? Her story is not just about chasing the dream, but it's about learning and evolving. And you know me, how much I love people who embrace the messy, beautiful middle. So join me as we dive into Robin's story. And as usual, I will link all the additional information in the show notes, including where to find Robin, as well as some of the resources we talk about. Okay, let's dive in. Okay, welcome, Robin, to Writer Unblocked. I am so pleased that you have agreed to join me on today's episode. And just so everyone gets to know you a little better, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nicole. This is really an honor as someone who is just getting started in the writing community. So my name is Robin Brooks. I am a writer from Nova Scotia, Canada. And I have a manuscript on submission right now that is upmarket fiction, and it's tentatively titled Skipping Stones. And I'm super excited to talk about it today.
I love that. I love that. And as I was saying before we started, I'm a little bummed that I have not been able to read it yet, but I will be patient. Because if we can start our conversation about the book and then we'll dive into other areas, but the reason I'm so eager to jump into the book is because I am a huge time travel, anything that has to do with time travel in a very creative way, I really, really love. One of my favorite books is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, about this man who gets unstuck from time. And so he lives his life in a nonlinear way, which is fascinating to me growing up when I was reading that. And so I was reading a little bit about Skipping Stones. And first of all, I don't know if the title's going to change, but I love the title and the context of what the book is about. And I don't want to get it wrong. So why don't you summarize a little bit what's going on in this book? Because like I said, I really want to ask you where you got the idea or how you came up with this concept.
Yeah, and then the title, funnily enough, was suggested to me by my agent. So that it had a different title, and then we were going back and forth, and she came up with this one, and I thought, oh my God, that's perfect. So, and I'll explain how it's perfect too. So I'm also fascinated with time travel, and I like that concept that you could, be in another time and also go back in time and know what had already happened. And I also worked in a women's prison for 14 years with people who have addictions. So have a lot of experience with trying to help people who are struggling with addiction. So I thought, what if you were addicted to time travel? So that's kind of the premise of the book, is that the main character, she's 50 years old, also like the older protagonist. And since the age of 6, she discovered that she could travel back in time. And then when she's 10, she learns to control it a bit more. So she's 50. She has avoided all her problems by using time travel to go back to good points of her life, has ignored the current points in her life that are the current problematic parts. And so her life is falling apart. She is getting divorced. She's lost her job. She has a horrible relationship with her child, and basically just spends her time going back in time to good parts of her life. And yeah, and then one day she discovers that she can actually change the past, and then that's the premise of the book. What should she change, and all the horrible things that result because of that.
I adore that so much because number one, time travel is escapism at its finest. I
Yeah.
mean, if you could avoid all the trauma or if you don't have to live through anything ugly
Yep.
and just live in the best moments of your life, it sounds ideal. But in
Yeah. And that's what
reality,
yeah. That's what addiction is, isn't it? It's just it's coping, just maladaptively coping, right? And so that's
exactly.
what she's doing.
And so it sounds like, again, from the summary, there's a little bit of healing by going back to the parts that you don't want, which is what we all do in therapy, right? We are
Yeah.
forced to confront because it's almost like a cautionary tale, right? If you don't confront these things, like your main character, Summer, right? If
Hmm.
you don't
Yep.
confront things like Summer's avoiding them, then you're actually making a bigger mess out
Yeah.
of your
Yeah.
life.
You've got to face those things because you can't, you know, it's you've got to accept them. And sometimes if it's a she has a couple really, really horrible things of deaths, and not to give too much of the plot, but there's and she does go and try to fix those things in her past. And then yeah, just the struggles and the consequences of she has to make really hard moral dilemmas, whether she actually wants to how she comes up with a way to save somebody, but it's a really not nice way, so to save their life. If that makes sense. If there can be a
I'm
not nice way to save somebody's life.
Well, there's like that's the whole thing, right? That's the more exactly the moral dilemma sometimes.
Yeah.
What was this story? And I might be getting it wrong, but I think it was Ursula Le Guin who wrote something like everyone could live in an ideal environment, but one person had to like live in a cage. And that's the only way everybody
Yeah.
could live perfectly. Like, do you
Oh my
save your whole
gosh.
community at the suffer? So there are very like
Wow.
morally gray situations.
That's one of the things with this is that sorry now I've it's this is getting older. I've interrupted you, then lost my train of thought.
It's a morally gray. It's a morally
The
gray
morally gray.
dilemma or character, right? Because
Hmm.
you don't know the adventure in storytelling and adventure in reading something is not to have things be so black and white.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say is that there's a few. I think this is perfect for like a book club. I would love to see it become book club because there's a few topics in it that I could see people on completely opposite sides of certain very controversial topics thinking that the message was the one they agreed with in the book. So I'm itching for people to read this and and for it to get out there and join book clubs and just see how they interpret it, because I just think it would be fascinating to see the what how people interpret things and the
Yeah.
message that they think that I meant.
Yeah. And then you can tell us if we're wrong or we're right.
Well, people can believe what they want, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I read, I think it was in college, we read
Hmm.
Albert Camus, The Stranger, and that's one of
Hmm.
those books where you could have a discussion and you could have people siding with one outcome or the other, or
Hmm.
one what was the actual intention of this main character,
Hmm.
or who was correct and how they acted. So any book that sparks that kind of discussion is absolutely like a top-notch book club
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope.
This is
Definitely.
great. This is great. So I now let's go. Haha, let's go back in time. So I have a few questions about your process. You and I connected because I was so
Hmm.
fascinated by your story, how you wrote a manuscript, you were in the query process, it didn't land anywhere, and it was really difficult, and actually
Mhm.
was your second manuscript, which ended up being Skipping Stones, that landed you an agent.
Mhm.
So I want to talk a little bit about that first manuscript, what prompted you to write it, and how, that whole process of querying with your first manuscript and just it not landing anywhere.
Yeah, and that was really devastating, and it was devastating for a long time too. It's not just that one thing that, you can get over, because of course writing takes a long time and you put so much into it. So I had written I was just about to switch jobs, and so my workload was a bit less. So I wrote a chapter of just had this idea about um and it was sci-fi too. So I had this idea about had to do with a guy who gets abducted to an alien ship. So and so I wrote the first chapter, and then I didn't go back to it for a full year, and I
Wow.
just left it. Yeah,
Just
because I
one
was
chapter
super
floating
busy.
there.
Yeah, and then I thought, I wonder what happens next. Um, so I got a bit more. A whole year later, I was a bit more comfortable with my current job because the learning curve was quite steep. And then I went back to it, and I just started writing and listening to a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels about writing, and reading books about the writing craft, and really just trying to work my way through this manuscript. But I didn't know what I was doing, really. I mean, I had all the wonderful intentions, but the basic premise of the book, of the manuscript, was faulty. But I learned so much from that. I learned, and so I wrote for 6 months, and then I revised, I think, for another 5 months, and then I started to query, and it didn't get anywhere. I had no even requests, and I think I sent out about maybe 45. And I know
Wow.
people do send out hundreds before they get a request, but or maybe before they get an offer. But to me, that was really good information to have. So it was I got tiny little bits of feedback, just tiny, because agents don't have time for that, and I respect that completely. But things about lack of interiority in the character, and that was being reiterated by podcasts I was listening to, such as "The Shit No One Tells You About Writing." CC Lyra is, yeah, she's really on about interiority. So that was so all these, and I had a beta reader read it, and then she said, "Well, I'd like to know what the characters are thinking more." So all these, that's just one
So
example,
you
but
were
all
getting
these things,
so you were
yeah.
getting consistent feedback, and for anyone listening, like, framing rejection as powerful
Mhm.
data is
Yeah,
really important.
absolutely. It was really, and I, especially when you get the same from multiple sources. And so I actually stopped querying, and I thought, well, the reason this isn't working is because it's a male main character. And so I thought I'll switch it to female. And somebody had also, a beta reader had said, I keep reading this in present tense, so maybe you'd want to rewrite it in present tense. And I was like, okay. So I rewrote it was, and it was too long to begin with too, anyway. But I rewrote it, changed the main character from male to female, changed it from past to present tense, and I thought, this is going to do it. This is going to get me requests, and it didn't. And I don't know if you, this is a horrible expression, but I'm going to use it anyway. Have you ever heard of, I think it might be a British expression. My husband is British, so I'm exposed to that, but it's the expression polishing a turd.
Oh my
Heard
God.
that?
So the only reason I think I'm married to my husband is
Yeah.
because he said that to me. I didn't like him as a person. I thought he was a horrible, grumpy person. We met at work, and I thought this guy is just the worst. And one day we were working on something, and it was really, really bad. And he said, "You can't polish a turd." And it was so unexpected, and it made me laugh so much. And it didn't. It's just like he just became this really different person to me. So that's
That's awesome.
hysterical.
Yeah.
So
So
you got to
for
the point where you were like, I can't polish this turd anymore. Okay.
no, and I realized that's what I was doing, and it was really, really hard to admit that the book was fundamental. I keep saying book. The manuscript was fundamentally flawed because the hook was just not there, and there were good parts in it. Like I think there were good parts in it, and but I learned so much about like the character development and things to do, things not to do, and so and my husband would I was quite it was a lot of time, and my husband would just he would walk by me at my laptop, like there may have been tears, and and he would say, write the next one, write the next one. And of course this is what also um writing experts and people in the writing community say, like the first book you write may not and probably won't be the one that gets you an agent and or a book deal.
Oh, I
So
hope people really hear you say that, Robin, because as someone who talks to authors a lot and coaches some of them, I understand
mhm.
being so, so attached and all the work that's poured into the first one, but
uh,
sometimes it's not the
yep,
first one, but it is the learnings of the first one that get you there.
absolutely. And it's hard because it's your time. Like you spend so much time on this, and then you think, well, that's just gone. But it's not. It's the stuff you've learned and the connections you've made, even with on social media with the writing community and in your home, like your local community too. So so I did. It was a year ago. It was December of 2023. I over Christmas time, I thought, well, the previous September, I'd written the back cover blurb of another idea, and that's the one that for the Skipping Stones. So I wrote that in September, and in December, I thought, well, this isn't going anywhere. I've sent out probably that time I'd sent out. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I sent out about 70 queries
It's a lot.
and not one full request, not one partial request, nothing. And not a lot of feedback either, which they from agents, which is fine. That's standard. And so I thought, well, I'll start writing this other one. So I did that, and I all as the months went on, it only took me 3 months to write that next one, based on the fact that I think I'd learned so much. And the more I wrote, the less the rejections from the first one hurt. And I actually started to be glad about the rejections, if that's weird thing to say, because I didn't want that book to be my first book.
See?
I don't, yeah. And it was sci-fi too. And I had no other like alien sci-fi books in me. I thought if they asked like, what else are you working on? I'd be like, well, nothing to do with sci-fi.
So I want to know
Mhm.
how you mentioned you wrote the blurb first. And I believe, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, you wrote the query letter before you wrote Skipping Stones. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So the blurb with it was I kind of wrote the blurb and then the query letter, I didn't know how many words it would be, but I and then the that's another thing is that I know now, or I found out from querying the first one that and all the research I'd done, that agents want to know that you have personal connections with the story you're writing. And the second book I wrote I had so many personal connections with it. So the character lives in Montreal, in New England, in France, and I'd lived in all those places. So I was using direct experience. So that final paragraph where you're supposed to talk about yourself and your connection to your book, I was able to put that into. So having that query letter while I was in the blurb while I was writing was really helpful, because sometimes I'd be a little stuck and I'd be like, okay, what am I going to do next? Oh, let's look at the query letter. Let's look at the blurb. And I'd be like, that's what I'm going to do.
That is an incredible tactic because I worked for an Amazon subsidiary for many years. We were very Amazonian. I worked for Audible, and we have
Mhm.
had a methodology, right? The working backwards methodology. So one of the ways
Oh.
that I really spark my big thinking and creativity is writing press releases before coming up with the thing. And I feel like you're just so freed, right? Writing a query letter and just getting yourself in that mindset of like, I'm writing a query letter and the book is done. Not really, but it's done for in the moment, in the time travel moment of writing a query letter, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. And then using that query letter to then reference as you're writing, right? You have your blurb and you have your
Mhm.
query letter, and then you write the book. I think that that's fascinating. And for me, for the way my creative brain works, again, the working backwards method is great. And I hope people listen
Mhm.
to this and it can work for them. And even if they're like maybe just starting to write or halfway writing, they could just
Yep.
stop for a minute and write the query letter and just
Yes.
imagine how would they sell it and then go back to it as they're writing, be like, am I
Mhm.
hitting all of this?
Yeah. Is it hooky enough? Like, because I wrote the blurb of a book I wanted to read. I thought I want to read this book because it was a fascinating concept to me, and I thought, well, hopefully it'll be fascinating to other people too.
I I might try that. I might just start writing blurbs for books that don't exist. And
Yes, that's what I do now. I get an idea and I'm like, write it down.
right, what would be well, what when
And,
you walk into a
and
bookstore, what would be the most interesting
yes,
thing to pick up?
and funnily enough, when my I got the call for the agent that I signed with, she asked me. She said, "What else are you working on?" And I had all these. I sent her three blurbs, like I bought back cover blurbs, and another idea that I had that didn't have a blurb. And I mean, I had titles for some of them too, and I think that may have clinched like her offering to me because I it wasn't just the one book, it was other ideas, and she could see where my mind was going.
That is fantastic. I was gonna say, do you have a tip for for author for people who are struggling, particularly let's go back to this querying process. It is, as you described, soul crushing. It is
Yeah.
really the most vulnerable, horrible
Oh,
process.
yeah.
I mean, is there anything? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you have a supportive family. You wrote about how there was a lot of air fryer meals during that time. So it sounds
Yeah.
like, like you have your writing seems important to you, but to your family because
Mhm.
they're being supportive. And
Mhm.
so I wonder, there are no ideal parameters to go through the querying process, but I wonder if there's maybe a couple that you are like, listen, if you have these parameters as an author, you can you have an air
Yeah.
fryer and you know and the right mindset, you can get through the querying process.
Yeah, you can order takeout frequently, and yeah. Um, I, I'm not sure about. I know what worked for me, and what worked for me is I do have an incredibly supportive husband and kids who are a little bit older, so they're needy in different ways, but not the toddler clingy way, I guess. So that was helpful. Um, I think especially having the supportive people in your life, and prioritizing it so that and having faith that other people will support you in that. So I think for a while I was hesitant to make it a priority, but then when I would and it was supported, it was really great. I'll give you a little story. This is just a couple months ago, but um an author event and about an hour from where I live, and it was a high tea put on by HarperCollins Canada, and I'd never been to anything like that before. But Kate Quinn was there, and Madeline Martin, and Donna Jones Alward, and they were talking about their books. So, and I kind of mentioned it to my husband, and he was like, "Yes, you got to go to that. You have to. You have to just go to that." And I was like, and that's like actionable support, you know what I mean? That and this wasn't anything that, I wasn't going to sell my book by going there, but it was just, he was like, you've got to do this. And it meant it was a Sunday away, and the cost of it all, which wasn't huge, but still. But just having that support, and just, you know listening day to day to, I mean, before I just right now, I was up there just shooting questions back and forth with him. I was like, and telling him about you and how wonderful you are. And he
Thank
was like,
you.
well, what does she do? And I'm like, well, she's a book coach and she does all this other stuff with Malcolm Gladwell, and she's awesome. And so yeah, so just firing things back and forth questions are just to have that, because it doesn't end for the people who support writers. It just doesn't end. It just goes
It
on and
doesn't
on.
end. And I love that you said actionable support, right? It's very different than just, oh, be supportive of authors. It's actionable support, and
Mm-hmm.
having people in your life where something like that comes up and they encourage you to attend. And like you said, it's not that I'm going to go sell my book at this conference, but it's just surrounding yourself with the energy of other
Mm-hmm.
authors at a
Yep.
publishing event. You talked about
Yep.
community earlier, and I wanted to ask that, like, how do you sort of explore in your community, like where the other book lovers or other authors may be that are local to you? Is it the library? Like, how do you connect or try to connect locally with the book community?
I've tried to do it mainly through social media and online. There was at one point, I knew a fellow mom who, our daughters are the same age, and I'd known her for a little while, but I discovered that she was also querying, and it was, oh my god, I just attached. I was like, we have to talk about this because
You found a
we need to
querying
validate each
buddy.
other. I think she had a lot of support, but like from other people at the time, but I didn't. So I was just like, tell me about you querying, tell me all about it. And we can, so that to have that validation, because your family can support you, but unless it's somebody who's going through it, that it's so validating to hear, about struggles and things like that. And I joined Bianca Murray's great beta reader matchup last December, so that was helpful. That wasn't local, but I mean, I live rurally in Nova Scotia, so the local is has to be creative sometimes. It has
Yeah.
to, yeah, or
Yeah,
be quite online.
we moved out from very like close to New York City, New Jersey area
Mhm.
to a more rural, and it's so peaceful. So I don't regret it.
Yes,
And the power of
absolutely,
social
yeah.
media. You're right. The Instagram community, threads, TikTok, all of those. I love the author community so much. I used to attend so
Mm.
many conferences pre-COVID, and that community is just the authors to support each other. There's very, from my end, I mean, I saw some, but there's very little drama. It's mostly a lot of supportive
Yeah.
community, openness, sharing things, sharing information about this
Hmm.
platform or these royalties changing, or watch out for this. I think I forget the name of it. I'll put it in the show notes when I remember. It's something like Writer Beware, and you can
Hmm.
find, right? Like all like the author
Yeah, that's
community
right.
pulls together says, be careful with this agency, or this is a scam, or like an agent should never charge you money, right? Like an agent should never, because people who don't know are like, oh, do I pay for an agent? Like, how much does it cost?
Oh,
Like, no, you don't.
yeah.
If an agent is charging you money, run.
Yeah,
PSA, run.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
But
Eh,
I love to hear that you have that supportive community first and foremost in your house, at home, in the core of it
mhm.
all.
Absolutely. And I've really not had hardly, I don't think I've had any negative experiences online with the writing community. It's really been amazing. And especially from people who are very established. And if they, follow back or like something that I post, I don't I have this almost like I idolize like as authors. So when they do that, I'm just like, oh my God, little me. Like,
I got a
it's just amazing.
response.
Yeah.
Yes, they're very engaged and they're very generous. You're right. So I've seen some established authors be so generous with their knowledge and their time and their help and their
Hmm.
support of others. And that's, if you could wave a magic wand and auto create a resource for authors or up and coming authors, what would that resource be?
You okay, like really a magic wand, like anything?
Like, you don't have to
Anything.
make it. Like, it just like suddenly a resource appears, and that's the one resource that you think every author should have in their pocket.
I think reading as much as possible and getting from different sources. I watched a lot of YouTube with Jessica Faust and James McGowan. I think I've watched every single one of their YouTube. I don't know what they call. broadcasts or whatever they're called on YouTube, and Save the Cat and um, writing excuses. I listened to those early on, before I realized that they were still doing them right now. So, but I mean, I think the main thing is feedback, and I wish that we were talking about prioritizing yourself and your writing. And I think if I mean things did work out for me, or they're working out, since I am on submission. But one of the things that I think maybe would have been valuable was to actually pay to have feedback, with a developmental editor, or I probably would have gotten. I would have known sooner that first book was maybe not working, or I could have learned a bit more. So just investing as in your writing as a business, I think is one of the things that, and not being afraid to to pay experts to do that, I guess, as long
No, it's
as
great.
yeah, they're the ones that, because that feedback, we just don't get it. So, and you could get it from writing groups if you trust the people who are giving it to you, I guess.
Yeah, feedback, not all feedback is equal. And I hear a
Mm.
lot of sort of complaints from some of my authors that when they have these beta readers, it's free. And the feedback they get is, I don't like this, or I didn't like this character, or I love this
Mm,
character. And that's not feedback, right? And so you have to
mm,
get feedback from a person who knows how to deliver feedback and a person who knows stories. And that could be a person that's a beta reader, but it's more often than not, like you said, a developmental editor or a professional that if you invest in your book and you
mhm.
pay, a good editor to give you that feedback, that is invaluable. Actually, because I'm so fascinated with the plot and the concept of this book, and like you said, you describe in your query letter and in your conversation with the agent that you have a connection. Can you talk a little bit more about that connection, if it's not too personal, in terms of like
Mhm.
skipping moments in your life and then realizing that you have to go back, or even the fact that your protagonist is an older woman, and
Mhm.
older women as creatives don't always get the spotlight they deserve.
Mhm. Yes, it was I did quite enjoy setting her age pretty close to mine. So the book is set in 2027, just because I thought, well, that's when it'll come out by then, hopefully. As I was writing it in 2024, I guess. And so she's just turned 50. So I will be 48 soon. So, um, and she has a lot of some similarities to me, and some not. Like, she has had her first kid in her early 20s, and I was in my 30s. So that I had to use my imagination a little bit to think about what it'd be like to have an adult child, or which I don't, an adult daughter at this point. And but it was, I went down, memory lane to write this book. I was digging up things from when I was at McGill, because she attends McGill and goes to the same residence I did. And I even put a bunch of little Easter eggs in for somebody who knew me back then, because they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that, this tiny little thing." So it's very authentic, a lot of it, which sounds weird because it's a time travel book. So, but a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Um, and so yeah, so there are some similarities, but I'm very happy in my life and she's not. So that was one of the probably the main differences, is that her life is kind of in shambles, which helps with character development. I think when you have a character that things aren't going so well. Um, and just with the time travel, I think I've always thought, well, what if I went back in time and did such and such? And then I think, well, yeah, but all these other things connected to it that are good wouldn't have
Wouldn't have happened.
happened. Yeah.
It's the
So
ripple effect. It's
yeah,
the
the
ripple
skipping
effect
stones.
that's why I love about this game of skipping stones, because it is, when I think about I read your book summary, and I thought immediately to moments of my life that I always try to avoid thinking about. And every
Mm,
time that I have tried to imagine cutting those completely out, or like just take a knife, cut them out, they didn't exist, they didn't happen, I didn't have to go through that.
mm.
I think, oh, but then this wouldn't have happened.
And to be clear too, there obviously there's things in one's life that if you could undo them, you absolutely would. And that is actually the I don't think it gives too much away, but her, because it happens in the first chapter, but her, the main character's brother died in Afghanistan. He was a soldier. So she decides when she can find out if she can change the past, she goes, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna save his life. Like that it, whatever negative stuff happens after that, it does not matter. So, and then she finds out what actually happens on that. Yeah.
Because
So
of that small change. Yeah, that's the
yeah.
trick with her. I have high respect for authors who write in the time travel category because it is very complicated, right? It's complicated.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's a paradox, and then there's rules of rules of time travel, and then
Yeah.
different factions, so to speak, about, well, if you do this you undo that, or do things branch into a different timeline, which is sometimes how things get addressed in time travel
Yeah.
universes.
That's what I'm working on one right now. I'm about halfway through another manuscript, and I can't avoid it. I just love it so much. There's time travel, it's dual point of view, and it's based on the life of my grandmother. When after she died, we found out that she was actually in the British Union of Fascists. Yeah, she was so ashamed of it. I know. And I'm not saying that like, yeah, so what, she was so ashamed of it. And then after after she was in prison for 2 years in Holloway prison. And so, yeah, so it's tentatively based on her life. And, and yeah, the regret about that. And, yeah, so, but there's time travel in that too. And
I love that. I
can't
am
get it,
plus
can't avoid it.
plus one on the time travel. I love it. You have to. It's the To me, it's the ultimate creative endeavor because you have to have your plot straight, and you have to have all your connection
Yeah.
points really clear in your mind when you
And
write
it's
something like
fun.
this.
It's fun. I
Well,
love
I'm excited for Summer's journey. Like I said, I please keep me posted. Obviously, I follow you. I am signed up for your newsletter. I'll link everything in the notes. And people can also find your website, robinbrooksauthor.com. And my last question, if you listen to this podcast, it's the one question I love to ask at the end, which is, what do you want to be true 12 months from now?
So I've watched all of your episodes, and I plan on continuing to do so. So my what I'd like to be true 12 months from now is I want to have my book, Skipping Stones, or whatever the title may be, to be shortly coming out because things take so much time, so long in the publishing world. I want my current book to be, or sorry, I want the one I'm working on right now, manuscript, the work in progress, to be finished and being polished. And um, I what I would those are like the concrete things. I would like to have more connection with the even more connection with the writing community. I want to go to writing conferences and to really feel like I belong and become more entrenched in the writing community. And the final thing that I want true 12 months from now is that I want to come back on your podcast and say, Nicole, look what I've done.
We are going to absolutely have you back because we're going to discuss. I'm going to read the book, and then we're going to really get into a book. We're going to have a book club, mini book club discussion in here. I am so excited for you. One of my goals is to attend as much as possible more conferences. And I've started a spreadsheet, and I just throw all the conferences that I find out about in it. I'll send you a link if you want to,
Right.
just anything, even if it's a virtual, I just try to keep track. There's so many, right? There's local, but there's also, national and international, and I can't always make them, but I'll share that with you. And if people are interested, let me know in the comments or contact me on Instagram. It's Reignite with Nicole, and I'd love to share resources with authors. And I think rebuilding that in-person conference community, attending panels, just getting to have breakfast, lunch, dinner with authors, meeting other
Yeah.
people, it's great. It's great. And it really was lovely pre-pandemic, and then it sort of has been slowly getting it start again. Well, thank you, Robin, so much.
Oh,
Keep
no,
me
thank you. I really
posted.
appreciate it.
The minute there's a pre-order link, I am there. And then we'll schedule you to come back.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me this week. For more information on today's episode, please check out the show notes. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast to receive new episodes right when they're released. You can subscribe right now in the app you're using to listen. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Reignite with Nicole. Lastly, I do have a quick favor to ask before we go. If you're enjoying the podcast, I hope you'll let me know by leaving a review. Thank you again for joining me in this episode of Writer Unblocked. I'll see you next time.